Somewhere, there is a number that has been used to measure you. Maybe it was a percentile, the day you were born, a grade bent onto a curve, a normal range on a page of blood work, or maybe it's just the quiet math you run in your own head, standing in a room full of people, working out where you land, above the line or below it, and you've probably never stopped to ask the strange thing about that number, right? Not where the number came from, where the idea came from. The idea that there's an average person, a normal person, and that you can be held up against them like cloth against a ruler. Because that idea is barely 200 years old. For almost everyone who ever lived, it just didn't exist. And one quiet man, looking at the wrong thing entirely, invented it. So, let's go find him. Let's go back to the moment the average person was born, not discovered, built, by someone who was, of all things, an astronomer and who reached for a tool meant for the stars and pointed it at a crowd of soldiers instead. This is a story about a word that used to mean something else entirely, about a number sitting in your life right now that was never, ever meant to be about you, and about a ghost that everyone gets compared to, and that no one has actually been. Bring the light a little closer. Start before any of it. For most of human history, there was no average person because nobody really needed one. There were just people. One of them tall, one of them strange in a way the village had a word for and loved anyway. A face you'd know in a crowd. And the word we now use to judge all of that, the word normal, wasn't even about people. It came from a Latin word, norma, a carpenter's square, the little right-angled tool that checks whether a corner is true. For centuries, normal just meant at a right angle, perpendicular, a plain fact about wood and stone. Think about that for a second. The word that now quietly decides whether your body, your mind, your whole life is acceptable started out measuring the corners of furniture. So how did it climb out of the workshop and come for you? His name was Adolphe Quetelet, a Belgian astronomer born in 1796. And he had a problem that, honestly, sounds like nothing at all. When astronomers measured the position of a star, every reading came back a little different, tiny errors. So, they had a trick. Measure it 1,000 times, take the average, and the true position rises up out of the noise. The mistakes cancel. The real thing remains. Quetelet looked at that, and he had a thought that would, almost accidentally, reshape the modern world. What if you did that to people? So he did. He took the chest measurements of more than 5,000 Scottish soldiers and plotted everyone. And out came that shape you already know, the bell curve. Most men bunched near the middle, fewer and fewer toward the edges, a peak and two long slopes, and this is where it turns. Quetelet didn't see that peak as just the most common chest size. He saw it, somehow, as the true one. The way an average star reveals the real star, the average man, he decided, revealed the real human being. Everyone off the peak wasn't simply different. They were error, deviation, a kind of mistake the universe had made on the way to its proper design. In 1835, he gave this invented person a name, the average man, and for the first time, a human being could be wrong just by not being typical. That's the match. Now watch the fire, because a word was waiting to meet this idea. Right around the same century, normal finally wandered out of geometry and into people, and it picked up a second meaning on the way. It stopped meaning only the most common. It started meaning the way you ought to be, the usual, quietly promoted to the ideal. And then another scientist took Quetelet's gentle average and did something colder with it. He took the bell curve and tilted it into a ladder. Above the middle, better. Below it, worse. He gave the world the idea that you could rank whole human beings by how far they sat from the average, and he used it to argue who should exist and who should not. The movement he founded, we call eugenics. One man drew a curve to admire the crowd. The next used it to sort them. And then, slowly, the average came home. It came for your body. That formula, Quetelet, scratched out in the 1830s, weight divided by height squared, sat quietly for over a century. Then, in 1972, a physiologist gave it a new name, the body mass index, the BMI, the number on the chart at the doctor's office, the one that can turn a body into a problem in about 3 seconds. And here's the part almost no one ever says. The man who put that name on it said plainly that it only worked for studying large populations, not individuals, not you. It was a tool for counting crowds, and we turned it into a verdict on single bodies. We took a head count and made it a mirror. This is the part that unsettles me. We didn't just inherit Quetelet's math. We inherited his mistake. The belief that the middle of the crowd is the right place to be, and that you can read a whole person off a curve. So let me show you what happens when someone finally puts that belief to the test. Twice. In 1945, an American museum built a statue. They called her Norma. She was sculpted to be the average American woman, every proportion drawn from 15,000 real measurements. And a newspaper ran a contest. Send in your measurements and find the living Norma, the woman who matched the average. Nearly 4,000 women entered. Not one of them matched her. Not one. They built a statue of the most normal woman alive, and she turned out to be no one at all. And right around then, the US Air Force was losing planes. Pilots kept crashing, and honestly, nobody could say why. The cockpits had been built decades earlier to fit the average pilot, every seat and dial sized to the middle of the curve. So they measured again. 4,063 pilots, and a 23-year-old researcher named Gilbert Daniels asked one simple question. How many of these men are actually average on all 10 dimensions that mattered? The answer was 0. Out of all 4,000, not one was average across the board. The cockpit built for the average man fit precisely nobody. They designed a seat for a person who did not exist and called him everyone. Now, just notice what each of them did next, because this is the quiet telling part. When the men didn't fit the cockpit, they rebuilt the cockpit. Adjustable seats, movable pedals, straps that shift to the body, the kind you slid into last time you got in a car. When the women didn't match Norma, they were told to go and fix themselves. But strip all that away, and both stories are saying the same impossible thing. Nobody has ever been average. So here's the real story, quieter than the one we were handed. Normal was never a description of you. It was a description of a crowd, mistaken for a description of a person. The average is a solid, real thing about 1,000 people. It is, honestly, a ghost about any single one of them. You were never failing to be normal. There was never a normal there to fail at. The yardstick was always measuring the room, and you were never the room. You're one specific, jagged human being, and that curve was never built to hold you. And honestly, I find that almost freeing. And here's where it stops being about a dead astronomer and starts being about you. That number in your head, in the crowded room, the percentile, the band on the chart, it's a shadow thrown by a group you happen to be standing in. Move the group, and the shadow moves with it. It was never the shape of you. The thing I keep coming back to is those planes, because the most hopeful part of this whole story hides inside them. When the average doesn't fit a real person, you don't have to break the person. You can rebuild the cockpit. They widened the seat, and suddenly people who'd been told they didn't belong were flying. Bodies the old average had quietly locked out for decades. Nobody has ever been average. Not one soldier, not one pilot, not Norma, not you. The carpenter's square was only ever meant for wood. Somewhere along the way, we held it up to a human life and pretended it could measure that too. It can't. It never could. Some things were never lost, just unlit. And then the lantern goes out. If you'd like to keep wandering into the dark with me, There's a new lantern lit here every week.